pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hello, everybody. It's 7 o'clock, or a little earlier. Joe, if I hit mute, I won't. It just gets me, right?
He won't be able to.
His volume
they won't be able to hear you. If I just turn down the volume. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start off with public participation. Did anyone sign up, Joe?
Nobody signed up.
Nobody signed up for public participation. Is there anybody here for public participation that would like to come forward? Hearing none, we'll move on to report of the chairman. I have no report tonight. Moving on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes and the warrant as presented in our packets? Jerry, thank you very much. Second. Dennis, thank you very much. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Accepted. Unanimous. Thank you. Reports of the committees. I'd like to start with our Student Board of Ed representatives. Thanks for coming in. Go ahead.
Good evening, Board of Education. Massac Boys Hockey had a win over Guilford on Saturday, and Massac Girls Basketball defeated Joel Barlow 44-38 last Thursday. The Massac Prom Fashion Show needs males to model for the spring show on March 16th. Please see Ms. Bartek in the main office to apply. The Massac Color Guard needs volunteers for their annual Massac Classic on February 5th. Please contact Ms. Knappick if interested or click on the link to sign up through your email. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other reports, Nick?
The CES Representative Council, we had our first meeting last Thursday. There, I think, are only 4 people held over from the last one, about 9 or 10 new people, and about 6 or 7 towns that still have yet to appoint people. So it was a good meeting. We elected our officers, and then the very next vote was to approve the teacher's contract. So it was baptism by fire. The CES teacher's contract settled at 11.4.
Wow.
And there's backstory to that, which I'm happy to share with you, Dave, at a later time. Mm-hmm. And then all the different people and all the CES administrators, principals of 6 to 6 and RCA and the associate director and all the different people gave 1 to 2 minutes on their departments and programs, because we were, not all of us, but many of us were new. So it was very informative. And next meeting's in March.
Okay, and thank you for going to that, because that's been a gap for us for a while, so thank you. Any other reports from committees? No, hearing none. Okay, report of the superintendent. Joe?
All I have is for Ron to run us through the December fund activity statement.
Yeah, so current year to date, pretty non-eventful at this time. I do want to, point out some off-budget things. Again, Sodexo, food service is running fine. It's actually running very well, unlike prior years. In the operating budget, again, as you're aware, currently special ed is running at a surplus, so that's kind of the one of the points of concern in the past, and no other real issues throughout the budget. So if anyone doesn't have any questions, that's really all I have to say.
Ron, one question on the Sodexo contract. I know we extended that. When's that coming up?
So that's going to, the RFP's actually, we're going to be putting that out this spring.
Okay.
It's up at the end of the current year.
How does that conversation go when it comes, do they have like tiers or packages that they offer? In terms of selection of food and things like that? I know I've received feedback from parents concerned about the quality of food that's coming in from Sodexo. So that's why I'm asking, how do they, when the negotiation happens, how do we choose what food to be serviced?
I'll be honest, it'll be my first time going through the RFP process.
The RFP process is actually run by the state puts the RFP out, But during that process and during the interview process, I'm sure those are questions we can ask.
You know what, Joe, that would probably be a good time to review the pros and cons of the National Food, program.
Yeah.
And so maybe a little PD on that. And also, I know a lot of those contracts, Justin, are set by the federal government, right?
Yes.
So the contracts are, we have limited discretion on those. So, but Joe, I think that would be pretty good is before we do that RFP is to have a little education on those different things.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Because, Justin, in the past, we voted to either go into food service programs, go out of food service programs, whether or not to extend contracts, go out to RFP.
Got it.
So that would be,
Like we took Massac off of it.
Right.
So that they
Correct.
could offer different foods versus the elementary
Gotcha.
and middle schools.
Yeah.
Have to follow the national. So they're more, I think, stringent in what they can and cannot offer.
Yeah, there's the
That was
national-
my
Yeah, there was the
understanding.
National School Lunch Program and then
Yeah.
the Healthy Food Certification.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two.
I think all of our schools, with the exception of Massac, are on the National School
Yep.
Lunch Program. And I think none of them are on the Healthy Food Certifications because if I remember correctly, it had to be an all or nothing.
Right,
So
all or
All the
nothing.
schools
Yep.
had to be in. And
Right.
we knew Massac was not going to be in.
Yep.
So.
and also how those contracts work. Ron knows
Yeah.
those very well too, as far as, like what happened to us last year. If they don't sell enough food, that then we have to chip in, and it should be budget neutral, correct, Ron?
That, ideally, yes.
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would be good for all of us to review that. Joe, anything else?
That's all I have.
We're moving right along.
I figure we might spend some time on the next one.
Yeah. Okay, moving along to old business. The superintendent's 22-23 proposed budget. That budget number is $64,836,802.64. I reached out to Mike Manjos. He is joining us right now via phone, so that we could get his thoughts on our proposed budget, the potential use or non-use of our grant money, and anything else that we may want to ask him his opinion on prior to us setting our budget. So, Mike, I will open up with if you can just give us your general thoughts on the budget, the town process, and then use or non-use of our funds as we debate how much grant money to use or not use to assist with the next year's budget. So go ahead.
Sure. All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate the relationship, and obviously we've worked together for a lot of years with the superintendents over the years. Basically, the way we look at it on finance is this is just a funding issue. So the questions are becoming, what's the best way that we can fund the budget? One, to get it passed, and two, to make sure, the town feels like they can afford it and push everything through that the Board of Ed needs. I know over the years there's been some pushback and some thoughts that, the Board of Finance has some issues with education or doesn't want to support the education budget. I can assure you that's never been the case. The Board of Finance over the last 4 or 5 years has always supported education. We've tried to come up with creative ways that we can finance it just to take the risk off the Board of Ed's budget. Now, obviously, right now we're dealing with extremely unknown situations, that a lot of new things that we don't really know the effects of immediately. We are very early in the process, meaning, you guys are going to send your budget to the first selectman still sends it to council, then it'll come to finance and finally go to the voters. We just want to make sure that we get a budget out that can pass, and that will pass so that we don't have to be in limbo and have people who are not involved with education making changes to the education budget. That's not ideal. It's not what we're looking for. We would prefer to have a budget that can be supported by everybody right out of the gate. Now, obviously, we're facing a very big number this year. There's a number of factors involved. Certainly, I'm well aware of all those factors. I've spent a lot of time talking with Ron and the superintendent, so I have a good understanding of the challenges that the board is facing right now. But there's also a lot of unknowns still. If we go back a year and a half when we were doing our last budget, what we ended up with and what the needs were totally different than we thought at the time, which makes it challenging, and we understand that as well. So from a finance standpoint, we're facing a couple challenges. One is, as of now, I have no idea what we're looking at on the town side, and it'll be probably another month or two before I even see that. So it's hard for me to say with any confidence, where we're going to need to be. But obviously, Ken's very conservative on the town side. I don't expect to see a lot of dramatic increase on the town side, so I'm expecting it to be a relatively small increase on the town side minus contractual obligations. Now, the Board of Ed side is facing a large increase, which I believe would be challenging to pass if it stays the way it is. I'm not saying I can guarantee that either way, but history has shown us that most of the multiple referendums we have had have been when we've gone out with a big number. So that would not be my first pick. I also believe there's a lot of unknowns still ahead of us in the next year or two. One is, how we get through the next 6 months from an education standpoint, whether the current situation improves quickly and, we can normalize education again, or will we still, find disruptions? We don't know that. Nobody really knows that, so we just have to prepare for any inevitability. I would expect that we do have a large amount of grant money, both on the Board of Ed side, on the town side. We've also made a lot of moves in the last year or two to try to cover the risk that faces the Board of Ed. We have a nice backstop now on special education, so we've tried to take that risk off the budget. We have a nice backstop still on COVID. That again, if we continue along this path, we have not needed to tap at all. That's another thing that we might want to look at using for another purpose. But right now, I think prudence would tell us to use the grant money to get us through the next year to year and a half, to keep the increase at a nominal level compared to where it is today. And again, it's still a big increase. Even if we use the grant money, it's still going to be significant and a challenge to pass, in my opinion. If you'll also remember, we have a fund balance hole that we're going to have to face because we did use fund balance in last year's budget. The good news is the fund balance in the town is strong, so I am not opposed to possibly looking at that depending on what the numbers come in. We have a fund balance policy. Currently, we're on the high end of that range. So I would not say that we won't consider doing that again. Obviously, eventually we need to get off the use of fund balance and be able to fund, through grants and taxes. But right now, I think if we did not use the grant money, I think you'd be facing a very significant tax increase that I think would be difficult to pass. So in my humble opinion, that's the way I would approach it. I also realize that we look out, long term, so 2-3 years out. One of the positive aspects you've seen of COVID is our housing market has strengthened dramatically. And this does not affect us immediately, but it will affect us come the next revaluation, which will help us maintain a mill rate that's not considerably higher than we'd like it to be. We're on the higher end of the towns around us right now, which is always a concern. But I realize that once this revaluation kicks in with what the market has done, we will get some benefit from that as well, which will help us mitigate that mill rate increase. So those are the things we're going to consider on finance. We don't get involved, for all of you who are new, of what you guys spend the money on. Your job is to give us a budget that is effective and will accomplish what you need to accomplish on the education side. I think anybody who's looked at the education in the town of Monroe over the last 10 years will say it's been very successful. So for all the back and forth and for all the sometimes bickering, We've always come up with a great solution. We've always come up with creative solutions. And I think anybody who looks at our education system has to consider it excellent. So I'm very proud of that. I'm happy to be involved with this. I'm happy to work with the Board of Ed going forward and the superintendent constantly. We've addressed problems as they've come up over the years. I know there's been talk about we had a surplus and we gave it back, so that's our money. Well, all the money is the town's money at the end of the day. And, when the Board of Ed had issues over the years, and, we had a medical issue, the town covered that. When we had an issue, where the Board of Ed was not able to fund the pension payment, the town did it for the Board of Ed. So the Board of Finance has always been willing to step up when the need was there and it made sense. And I don't expect that to change anytime soon. I think we've created some nice backstops by doing these creative fundings and financing and putting the money away so we won't get hit by surprises. So that's pretty much all I've got. I'm happy to answer a few questions. Unfortunately, I'm traveling right now, so I'm in Miami, so I don't have a ton of time tonight. But I did want to come in and just make it clear the position of the Board of Finance. Again, I'm only one person, but I am the chair, and I've been on a long time. So I have a good rapport with everybody on the board, and I think we're pretty aligned on what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm happy to answer some quick questions if people want to throw them out. I'll do my best to answer.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Mike, any specific questions for Mike at all?
New guy card here. Fund balance, that's rainy day fund, is that what he's referring to? When he says fund
Yeah,
balance?
it's often called a rainy day fund. It's basically our cushion. We have a policy which gives us a range. When I started 10 years ago, we were very low, and we've built it up over the last 10 years to the point now where we ended up getting a ratings raise last year, and a lot of it was due to the fact that we have this fund balance and that we've budgeted very conservatively over the years. So, our borrowing costs will be saved cheaper over the years because of that. Again, over the last few years, rates were so low that it didn't make a huge difference, but as we're starting to see rates already creep up, it will make a huge difference when rates start to normalize.
Thanks, Mike.
Any other, Dennis, go ahead.
Mike, Dennis Condon here. First, congratulations on the bond rating for the town. You guys have been real successful in making this town worthy to come to because we're seeing the impact of all your hard work. Clearly, people are coming to the town in droves, some of it COVID-related, some of it just because it's a great place to live. But that is having severe impact, as you know, and you've heard, on our budget to meet the needs of all these kids. And I think what you're going to be presented with when we're done tonight is really a needs-based budget. Now, you're right, it's expensive, and but we also have to watch that we don't create a cliff for the town. We want to make sure that 2 years from now, if we're using some of the grant funds to fund this, that now we're not hitting the town with a 8-9% tax increase because there's no other way to handle the people that have come to the town, the students and the teachers that have to deal with that without a dramatic change. So we're trying to operationalize our expenses to make it normalized, and we appreciate your help in doing that, and we got to see exactly what funds we can do to kind of ease that tax burden on the town, but more importantly, take care of our teachers and our students. Thank you for coming on the meeting tonight.
No, and I appreciate that, and it is always a juggling act. And, I don't think there's anybody who's a volunteer in this town who really doesn't want the same thing. We want to have a great town. We want to have great education. We want to have reasonable taxes. So it's just how we balance those different approaches and what we're trying to accomplish. And I'm a big believer in trying to do it in bites. And I just believe that if we don't use that fund balance, it's going to be a hard sell to the taxpayers who say, why am I getting a 5.5 or 6% tax increase when they have all this money sitting there that we don't know what we're using it for. So it's a matter of, do you take the money now or do you take the money later? Eventually, it's the same money. It's really just funding sources. It's a matter of, do we spend that money on funding something today or do we have our needs? And I think the challenge we're facing, especially today, is it's very hard. And I don't envy what you guys have to do to try to figure out what your needs are going to be in 2 years. Because this is uncharted territory. Nobody knows long-term effects of what we've faced. Nobody knows if we're going to be, normalized school for the next 6 months. We just don't know. And, the reason you guys had a great surplus wasn't because we didn't support education. It was because, we didn't have to do busing. We didn't do a lot of other expenses that are normal. So, that did go back to the general fund, which is good because it gives us the opportunity to use fund balance to help mitigate some of these taxes. So that money doesn't just go away. It's just a matter of using it at a different time. So I think that's an opportunity we're going to have to look at. I just believe that there'll be more of an appetite if we don't use some of these funds that are available today. And I strongly recommend using them as much as you can. I think there's going to be more of a push for cuts to come later in the process. I think, honestly, I can't speak for the first selectman, but I think, he has the opportunity to make cuts, Board of Finance has the opportunity to make cuts, and I think my fear is that if we don't use them and we just push it through at the higher level, I think you might end up getting cuts, which is just, instead of using a different funding source, you're going to end up having the budget cut, and that's my fear.
Anything else, Jerry?
Hey, Mike, Jerry Stevens here. How you doing?
Hey, Jerry.
Hey, Mike, can you explain? I know in your thoughts you said to use the grant money, and then you said we might be able to use excess COVID money. Could you explain that? The excess COVID money?
We have $500,000 put aside for COVID expenses. We did that when we had a surplus and we didn't know what the expenses were going to be. So that is sitting in a fund on the town side. So if we do find COVID expenses that, are not covered by the normalized budget, we could certainly request the Board of Finance to use some of those funds. So the money is there, just like we have $1 million sitting in a special ed fund. So if you come up with a situation where your special ed goes over budget, you're not going to have to make the hard choice of cutting other programs. There's the ability to have a backstop there, which is why we built it that way.
Thanks, Mike.
No problem.
Okay, Mike, it's Dave. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to call in tonight, and also you and the Board of Finance
No, it's my pleasure.
for all your help and working together, and we look forward to that continuing.
I do too. Appreciate it, guys, and keep up the great work. I think you guys are doing a great job, and hopefully, we'll come up with something that everybody's happy with, and we can all pass with.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Shannon's probably still.
Shannon, are you on the line? Shannon, are you on the phone line?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to do is, with that input from Mike and some conversations that we've had, is to go around the table and get everyone's input on the superintendent's proposed budget and any ideas, pros and cons that we have. And then after we all get a chance to have our input, we can start with motions. So, Nick, do you want to start us off? And I'll just come right around just on general thoughts, and then we can do motions after we have a discussion, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, okay, so,
Sorry, I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
no, that's okay. I'll do it in a couple buckets here. So I'll start with the grant funds. I've really been thinking about this, and I'm going to listen to the rest of the conversation. I'm still struggling with kind of the accounting of it all, using grant funds to fund positions that are supposed to be funded, year after year after year. I also think that using the grant funds in this year, we are knowingly creating a structural deficit in the Board of Ed budget in the out years. So that really concerns me. I think that we need to deal with what's in front of us. And who knows what the appetite of people is going to be in years to come on the budget. But the grant money isn't being used for what it was appropriated by Congress to be used for. And just philosophically and operationally, I struggle with that. I think I still want to advocate for the 4 things that I talked about at the last meeting. I think that we need to fund a space needs assessment in this budget. I think that if we're going to continue to see enrollment increases in the years to come, which I don't think is an unreasonable assumption, perhaps they won't be as big, that the physical space that we have in our district is going to be something that we need to systematically look at. I still think that our finance department needs an additional person. You've heard me talk about the head count versus when we had a full-time director previously. I think that we need the 10-month admin at Fawn Hollow. We're increasing all of these teachers using the grant money, but we haven't really increased our administration, so they should be somewhat proportional. And I guess out of the 4 things I talked about last time, the biggest thing that I still struggle with is the funding of mental health. I firmly believe that we need to put more money in this budget for mental health. So that's the second bucket. And the final one is, this is my, I think, 7th budget between the town council and the Board of Ed. And another thing I've always struggled with is getting a budget passed on the first try. I think that that's admirable, but philosophically, I believe that our role is to put out a budget to the people that funds the school system at the level that we think the school system needs to be funded at, right? So, like, at this level, we don't need to talk about, being fiscally conservative, being fiscally liberal. We don't need to supplant our 9 opinions for what the people are going to tell us. The people will tell us if they don't like it. So, I've always been against, making big cuts at this level, because then if the budget does fail, you've left money on the table. Whereas if you put the budget out and the budget failed, and then you cut a little bit, it might have passed on the second time. So, I think it's honorable to say, we want to put out a budget that's going to pass on the first time, and no one wants to put out 10, 11, 12. I mean, that's crazy. But, I think it's our role to put out a budget that we think funds the school system at the level that we think is appropriate. So the grants, the asks for things that we should add back, and then passing the budget. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Dennis.
I don't necessarily disagree with the grants discussion. Some of those are limited for mental health and other things that we should target it for. As for the other items, have you done a cost analysis of what those increased costs would be? I mean, we already have a solid budget in regards to what the increase is. If you added back those positions, how much more are you asking for?
It would be $375,000.
$375,000?
Yep.
Okay. And what do you have for the building analysis?
40.
40 grand, okay. I mean, it hasn't been asked for by the people running the school, so I understand your supposition of, looking ahead, maybe it may be needed, but, that would change from the ask that we have now to another increase of $365,000. That's another 0.5% roughly, or maybe 1. That's a significant increase, right? And these times are pretty hard for everybody in the town with inflation the way it is. So I think that's a concern that I have. I do agree that we shouldn't be using all of our grant money, but we should target some of the grant money for the concerns that we heard that we're trying to address with programs. And hopefully Joe has those defined for us today in regards to what programs we could add to address some of those things, because that definitely is a need that's current and growing if you look at the society that we're living in. So I appreciate the input. I just don't think that we can afford to raise this any more than it is, given current issues. It really, truly is a needs-based budget that we have before us. But, I'm into using some of the grant money, but I don't think we should be wiping out our so-called rainy day fund for something that wasn't targeted. We used, for whatever reason, I wasn't here, so I'm speculating, but we used the grant money basically to cover the increase in population and the needs from the teachers and supplies to deal with that, versus going back to the town for another referendum to increase our budget. I agree it's an operational expense that's not going to go away. As we have these students and we have these teachers, we're going to need to continue to support it. So I am in favor of reducing our burden so we don't hit a cliff, but I don't think it could be as draconian as, oh, we're going to use all our grant money for this at this point in time. So I'd be more in favor of cutting it to, using half, so we have half next year, so at least we can utilize some and kind of ease our burden. That's kind of where I'm sitting.
Thank you, Dennis. Christine?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I struggle with using grant money to cover teaching positions, that we had to hire due to increased enrollment, where we truly have a need for the mental health of our students. And I would really like to see the grant money used where it does ease some of the burden to the taxpayers while using some of the money, what it's intended to do, and really fund programs that will help the mental health of the kids. That's
Agree?
really, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Alan?
I'm open to, hearing the pros and cons of using some of the grant money. I'm thinking 50%, but like I said, I want to hear what other people, where everyone else is coming from on that. Some of my concerns were the enrollment increases, and for the most part, I think that's been addressed. Obviously, the rising mental health concerns is something I think we need to look at, and even if it's like implementing like the program that Yale has, like Ruler or something like that, I think that would be great. And I'm also, I've been pretty open about this. I'm also concerned that we don't have a full-time school psychologist at Monroe Health. It's extremely difficult to be to not be there every day. You can't tell these kids, oh, don't have a crisis because I'm not here on Thursdays and Fridays. Wait until Monday to, melt down. I just think we need to be in alignment with the other schools in Monroe and have a full-time psychologist available to the kids, especially given the rising need and mental health concerns. And that wouldn't be the only person's responsibility. They, school psychologist there runs the PPT meetings, takes the minutes, does the evaluations for the kids. So it's a lot to juggle when you're just there a couple days a week. You really need to make that person whole.
It's trying to balance what's responsible and what's right for our taxpayers while setting up our future practice, that we don't, that we have our operating expenses in the budget so that we're not setting up our future to fail with a cliff. We're just trying to balance that appropriately. It's uncharted territory for sure. It's not an easy task, but that's what we're trying to do.
I didn't forget you, Shannon. Hold that thought.
Hey, Dave.
Alan, anything further?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, as I said,
I don't think I didn't mean to talk over anybody. I think it was hard to hear that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yep.
Jerry, go ahead.
as I said earlier, I think we have worked very hard on what we have in front of us. And I don't see, and I've said this in the past, I know people shrug, I don't see any fluff. I don't see any excess. We've worked very hard to give Monroe what it needs. And when you look at cliffs, though, and enrollment is also a cliff, I still think the $40,000 for a facility study is a smart move down the road. The enrollment hasn't gone anywhere but up. And I'm a little concerned about where we're going to put the extra people. So that's one. The next thing is, I do have a gigantic concern with using a majority of the grant money for anything that's an operational expense and not mental health. I mean, yes, I'm more than open to sit here and listen. I mean, I think it's great. But I just, from my point of view, I just want to emphasize that I feel like most all of you have said, that we really should be focusing on that. I mean, the mental health is huge, and that grant is there. And, you know, as you said, Annis, with the cliff, that was a great point when you said, I was shaking my head yes at you. It was a great point. You know, it's just, and there's no crystal ball. I mean, that, you know, most of us have sat here for a long time. There's no crystal ball to look down the road. We're just trying to put a safety net up, and that's the hardest thing. That's all I have to say, David.
Thank you, Jerry. Go ahead, Jeff.
A couple things. First on the enrollment. I went back and looked. If you look at our census numbers, we're actually down in population. And while obviously we have an obvious increase in students, I would just hesitate on doing the facility study right away, because I think we don't have developments coming into the town. So what we have is a finite number of homes in town, and you know that will change at any point. How many of those are sold will change, but I really haven't seen. Look, we have 16 houses for sale in Monroe, so you know we did have a lot of sales the previous year and a half, but the overall population has come down. I almost to 1,000 people down from where we were. So without any new development, I think the key will be seeing some of the kindergarten numbers coming in, getting a final number on those before I would recommend any commitment to a study. I mean, I always laugh when I talk to Alan about the money that we've put towards studies, you know, and when we go back and look back at those studies and how wrong they were, it's frustrating that we spent the amount of money we did on them, and that we relied on the information that turns out to be something that you know we really shouldn't have been relying on altogether. You know, I'm in a unique position to be able to see how many homes we're selling, to go back to the numbers, and I just don't see the turnover that we had previously. So, you know, in other words, unless a brand new development comes in with a number of homes, I don't foresee that being an issue. But like I said, you could have had those people come in with families, with older families transitioning out, replaced with new families that haven't hit our enrollment yet. So I think a telltale will be kindergarten. The second part that I wanted to talk about was I'm just not in favor of using the bulk of this money towards the budget. I think there is a middle ground. I think, as you know, we heard, we have some serious concerns about our students and the mental health, and you know, I think that I think we'll see in motions to come that we're going to do the best we can to address those. And I look forward to Joe hearing some of the programs that we could potentially implement.
Thanks, Jeff. Justin, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I'll just kind of reiterate where I've kind of stood on this from the beginning, but I'm just really cognizant coming into this, obviously, you know, taxpayer with 3 kids in the schools. I think the environment we're in is, everybody said it right, relatively unprecedented. I think we have to be really cognizant of the ask that we're going to put in front of the taxpayer. Yeah, everybody has less money than they did 11 months ago, 12 months ago, and I think asking them for an increase, I think we have to weigh that really heavily. What I heard from Mike, though, is that, you know, there's funds available there. You know, a rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it. And I would say that, you know, this would fall under rainy day, right? We need additional funding. And, you know, that is the taxpayer's money at the end of the day, right? So I think it's what we use it for. And I know that, you know, that's up to them to decide ultimately. But I think we have to do everything we possibly can to reduce the burden on the taxpayer, but deliver the best possible educational experience we can. So I mean, I think, you know, from a funding perspective, you know, those ESSER funds, I think you could make the argument that they're, you know, we could leverage them towards certain programs, but we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that this budget delivers on that educational service we're all looking for, but as efficiently as possible. And we have to do what we can to reduce the ask on the taxpayer in delivering that as much as possible. So And then, like, you know, we had talked about the mental health piece. I still haven't seen a clear identified root cause as to what's driving it. And I know it's multi-causal, but I'm not getting clear identification in terms of what it is. Alan, you sent me an article last week that I read through, and I think there was a lot of great information in there. But I think we need to clearly identify what's driving it, and then the funding and the money needs to go toward that, right? How do we address that upstream versus putting the money downstream? And ultimately, at that point, you're just putting a Band-Aid on it, right? We're not solving the problem. So I think we need to identify that, and then that's where the funding needs to go, in my opinion.
Thank you. Shannon, do you have anything additional? I didn't forget you.
No, that's okay. Were you able to hear what I said before?
Yes.
Okay, no, that was it.
Okay. Thank you very much. If I can add to the discussion, just to let people know that for this year, due to enrollment and SEL behavioral health needs, we do have several staffing positions, obviously, that we all know that were put in, but we also put into place a summer school program, SRBI Tier 1 training for teachers, another, I'm trying to read this, Massac High School summer program, regular ed. Right, Joe? Just to
Yeah, those were a
just to kinda
couple
go
of
through
the
some
couple
of
of
them.
programs brought in for the ESSER 2 funds. Yeah.
Yep, we did add in behavioral techs.
Mhm.
We did add in new classroom materials. After school, no, I'm sorry. Spec ed teacher. Just looking down the list at what is current. So to review the grant money, make sure I get my notes right. We received 1.616 million in grant money this year with some of the things in the staff that I had just mentioned, K-5 math coordinator, etc. So for this year, our spend was $823,729, which leaves us $792,273 in grant money to use for the next 2 years. I've asked Ron to rerun the numbers on the slide that he gave us previously as to if we use different percentages of the remaining grant money, of how that would reduce our increase if we were to approve the superintendent's budget. If we were to use 50% of our grant money, that would drop the increase by 0.64, which would be a 475% increase. If we use 75% of the grant money, it would drop us by 0.97, which would be a 4.42 increase. And if we use 100% of our grant money, which I'm not hearing any interest of doing, it would drop us 1.29, so the increase would be 4.1%. I am hearing, as we go around the room, some consensus with the ruler program, the tutoring program that you had mentioned last meeting.
Do we have the dollar amount of that?
And
Yeah, about 125,000 combined, elementary and high school.
Great.
and also the school psychologist position that Alan was mentioning. So I hear consensus on those three things. So you want to have some conversation on those three items, or the items that, any further discussion on the items that Nick brought forward? Nick?
Well, I guess the other question I had was, at our last meeting, we talked about asking for data on what would it mean to increase the structure of mental health capabilities of the district. So I just didn't know if there was any more information on that.
Yeah, I talked to Ann on that. Basically, the one person who's pretty much dedicated. If I look at, mental health, the one person in the district that's geared for that is our social worker. I mean, we definitely have, school psychologists at every building. We have, 2.4 school psychologists at Massac. We have 2 at the middle school, 1 at Fawn Hollow, 1 at Stepney, and 1.6 between Monroe and the preschool. They're not necessarily, I wouldn't call them necessarily mental health professionals, though. They're special, Alan could tell you, he's a school psychologist. They're mental health, they're primarily, their work is done doing evaluations and whatnot for special education, but they definitely pinch in times of need when there's issues. I know they were my go-to people when, in a crisis situation. I think in the same vein, our guidance counselors, I mean, you can consider them, mental health professionals to some extent, but that's not, the bulk of their work. They have, a lot of other work that they're doing. We have 5 counselors at the high school, in addition to Ann, who's the instructional leader, who does some other work. 3 at the middle school, 2 at Jockey Hollow, 1 at STEM. We have 1 at Fawn Hollow, and then a 0.6 at Stepney, and a 0.6 at Monroe Elementary. When it gets down to people who their primary job is mental health, it pretty much falls on our school social worker, who's right now divided between the 5 schools. That's why this budget asked for an additional social worker. Is that why you're raising your hand, Alan? Too?
Oh no, I was just saying there's along the lines of what you're saying. There's there's proactive and there's reactive.
Yeah.
I think proactive is, proactive is obviously much better, but a program like Ruler is proactive.
I agree.
So that we don't have to be reactive when behavioral situations arise. We can, start a program like Ruler, you even start it in pre-K.
Yep.
Kindergarten, and it goes all the way up. So you're kind of working with kids at that level.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things, I know tonight wasn't the night for it, but I do want to invite our counseling staff to come in and talk about a lot of the proactive things they've done. I brought Ann in 2 meetings ago to kind of address the question then was, what's driving the mental health crisis. But there is a lot being done proactively that I want them to get through. But I agree with you, Alan, on the Ruler piece too. I think it'd be good use of funds.
If I can just add to that, the superintendent submitted his budget. This is what he says he needs to run the district next year. We've done our due diligence. We've all met with department heads. We all met with department heads last year. The year prior to that, we went through every single line item, and we made several cuts, reductions. We eliminated. So we've done our due diligence. Jerry, I agree with you. This is a needs-based budget. We're not asking for a lot of fluff here or any. And this budget addresses increased enrollment in the SEL issues, both caused by COVID. I understand the needs. I'd like to see the superintendent's budget passed tonight by us with use of some grant money. We can discuss that level, and perhaps insert a couple of these programs that I'm hearing from all of us. Dennis.
I think that's the goal. If we can add the psychology, what's that, 0.2, I think, right? That expense?
Added
Increase.
from like 0.8 to full, right?
0.8 to full? Okay, if we could add that, and add some mental health analysis, right, and add that tutoring program, that sounds like that. If we can do all that and maintain the budget, I think that would be the goal. I mean, you have a very tight budget. It looks very well prepared. I think we've done our due diligence. I know we have wants that we'd like to address, but this is needs-based. I think you've done a good job of putting that together for us. I really appreciate everybody's effort.
Thank you.
Jerry.
Ron, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. I'm looking at that 500,000 for COVID. Ron, where are we right now at our COVID expense? No crystal ball. How are we looking from now to the end of the school year so far? Just give me a round of it. I don't want you, Ron, I'm not going to hold you to
Give me a
it.
second.
I'm just confused by the question, if you don't mind,
Oh, sure.
right? Because, discussion.
You mean overall, like?
Mike-
Dennis, hold on just one second.
Mike, no, it's a good question. Mike had mentioned that
Uh-huh.
there's an extra 500,000 put away at the town
Right.
for COVID expenses.
Right.
I'm just trying to see if there's any wiggle room in anything we have left to get us money. That's, I'm just looking for
Yeah,
other
I
avenues.
agree with your, applaud your approach, but I don't think that's our call, right? We have to present them with whatever we need, right?
No,
And if that's the need, I don't care.
Extra money.
I mean, sorry, Ron, but I don't care how you find the money, right? You're gonna have to find the money. If we think this is the rock solid
Oh, no.
budget,
Dennis, I wanted the budget to go the way it is. I don't even want to touch the grant. I'm trying to find, I'm trying to be the negotiator here and find some extra
gotcha.
funds. I understand what you're saying, but if the 500,000's left in June,
yep.
and we don't spend it, it's back to the town. So I'm
Yeah,
asking you
well,
a
we
very
you
analytical
got,
question.
but a lot of hypotheticals, right? You have healthcare insurance.
Understood.
We have no,
Understood.
New York's on reroute for hospitals. They don't do
I
elective.
understand.
If we go there, we're not gonna have the insurance cost either. I mean, this is very speculative.
I understand. I'm just trying to get an idea.
Yep, and gents, let's let Ron answer that. That
Thank you.
500 COVID,
the
is that
question
roll?
is
Does that
How
roll?
is the board tracking on COVID-related?
Right, that's all I want, no, yeah.
And Ron, that does roll to next year, right?
The 500,000.
The 500,000?
It's actually, it's assigned fund, it's in a separate fund, okay? So it doesn't lapse. It's emergency, the money was actually put aside for emergency and disaster relief.
Gotcha.
So it was a little broader than just
Gotcha.
COVID, but it was put aside with COVID in mind, obviously.
Understood.
Jerry, I believe the intent of that also, if I can add to that, was that if we needed to buy an exorbitant amount of COVID supplies,
Oh,
we would
yes.
have a backstop to
No,
that.
Dave, I
Like
was
cleaning
looking-
supplies.
Like
I was
medicine.
looking for a backdoor,
masks,
Dave. I
right?
was
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah, and I don't,
I thought, that's what I thought when we discussed it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's,
It was to help our budget last year, not
Right.
have to purchase COVID supplies, cleaning supplies, things like that.
Just trying to find a backdoor for more
Right, no,
money.
and-
That's all I was
and
trying to do.
and the
Just
same
looking.
with the 1 million spec ed fund.
Mhm.
Right.
That's not gonna leave us at the end of June. That will roll in
Right.
case it's a backstop.
Gotcha.
So those two funds are there. If we run into an issue, we would have to ask the Board of Finance to move that money over to us
Gotcha.
for that purpose.
Okay. Thank you.
Ron, would that be our maintenance line items?
Yeah, no.
Oh, it's okay, Ron,
I'm gonna-
it's
I'm gonna
fine.
have to dig a little deeper, actually.
Now, Ron, don't, it's fine. It was just a hypothetical. Don't kill yourself. It's not worth it.
Joe, if we, obviously I'm hearing from everybody that the tutoring program and the ruler program, as well as the increase to the school psychologist, I'm hearing that some consensus on that. Is there a way that we can do that and make it budget neutral without hurting your proposed budget, and give you the discretion to look through that, rather than us saying, we're gonna cut this position or this program or that position to fund these things?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably prefer if we were looking at it, using it through the budget, that we look to fund those things, and I would meet with my team to, find out the areas that, if we wanted to pull anything out. Is that what you're asking, Dave?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Instead of us going through line by line and taking things
Yeah.
away, leave it to the superintendent with his discretion to find out, how do we fund these with what's important to him as well.
Right. So, do we make a motion for that? Or not yet?
Any other discussion? Joe, I have,
I just want
ahead,
to add to
Dennis.
that, Dave, if you don't mind,
go ahead.
with the idea that we don't create yet another cliff, right? If we're adding things, right, and moving pieces around, we want to make sure that we can maintain funding for those on the operational budgets going forward. That's kind of the goal, right? Or within the budget that we set forth today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the addition to the school psychologist is a 0.2, so it's not huge. Joe, can I ask a question? New business number
Addresses
A,
the mental health
shouldn't that
issue.
be 22-23 budget?
It should be.
Okay, just wanted to check.
Should be.
Okay.
Oh, no.
See, new business
Yes,
number A?
yeah,
Okay.
it should be.
And then, I think we have consensus on those three positions. We'll have to talk about a motion on that. What is the consensus as far as use of grant money? Can we come to an agreement on how much of the grant money we are going to use to help offset the increase? Like I said, right now we're at a 5.39% increase. If we use 50% of our grant money, that would take us down to a 4.75. 75% would take us down to a 4.42. We have $792,273 remaining after this year. 50% of that would be $396,136 that we could possibly spread out over 2 years unless we want to use more than 50%. Dennis?
I recommend we go for 50% because that'll give us 50% to work on the mental health issues and the other things that we know of under the grant stipulations. So it actually gives you funds for not only this year, but also gives you half to work on next year.
Correct.
It gives you a latitude to do what you need to get done.
Right, especially if we do the study,
Right.
you'll have more knowledge to see what we need and use that money into the following year. I mean, we don't know what that study could prove, or what our needs are.
We could use 50% now and 50% the following year, because that does not expire immediately, right, Ron?
Correct.
Yep.
And some of the things covered are like the behavioral techs, right, that we'd be using it for?
Yes, I guess it would just depend on how
Right,
we
depending on
allocate it,
but
how we allocate it
how
out.
do you allocate it, and then do you have to show to the state how you're allocating it?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, okay. So it's got to be still allocated towards what the grant specified?
Yes.
Okay.
We can't use it for whatever we want.
No,
We
no,
have to
no,
be,
I know. And
within
I
the
know
grant.
you could, I know like there was leniency with using it for staff and supplies due to COVID increase in enrollment, but,
Yeah. Yeah, we've had everything approved in there, so
Right.
all those things that
Right.
I've shared in the past
Mhm.
would be acceptable uses of the money.
Any other thoughts on percentages of grant money
I
to
think
use?
50%. That's, I feel like that takes the staff pretty much that we're concerned about and puts it into our operational budget. Give or take, but
Okay. Nick?
Yeah, I disagree. I think that we should be using the bare minimum of that to only cover things that are mental health related, such as behavior techs or the school psychologist. There's $300,000 in this chart that we had, actually, not even the new one. This was on the original one. That's 2 kindergarten teachers, a grade 3 and a grade 4. And I just disagree. I'm just one, but that's how I feel.
Okay. I want everyone to be heard, so thank you for the comments. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen? We need to close the discussion, and under new business, we can hear motions for the budget. Are we there? Comfortable with 50? Yeah. Okay, then we will move on to new business, which is the approval of the Board of Education 2022-23 budget. And I am updating that from the agenda because we're not approving the 21-22 budget with a vote anticipated. Christine?
Okay, I would like to make a motion to add the tutoring program, the ruler program, and increase the school psychologist position from 0.8 to 1.0, and give the superintendent discretion to make these 3 items budget neutral.
Okay, motion from Christine. Do I have a second? Second by Jeff. Any discussion? Nick?
Just to clarify, this is no grant. This is all we're talking about in the budget.
Correct, keeping
Correct.
it budget neutral.
Understood.
Yes, but I'm hearing consensus and I agree. These are specific programs to help the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Got it.
programs and staffing, and the the tutoring program and the ruler program, not just brought up by us, but from the superintendent and staff as well, too, as their number one picks. Go ahead, Nick.
Is there a rough dollar amount on what we're asking the super to find in other places?
150, Joe?
That would be, with the school site, probably about 170.
Okay.
Approximately.
Approximately
Just
170.
for the record, approximately.
Yep.
I understand.
Okay, any other discussion on this specific motion? No. Okay. All in favor? Shannon, are you a yay or a nay?
I'm a yay.
Okay, motion passes unanimously.
Good job, guys.
Okay. Any other motions to be made? Nick?
Oh, sorry, you
Oh,
go.
no, please.
No, you go first.
I would like to, I have 3 motions. I'd like to make a motion to add $40,000 for a space needs assessment to the budget.
Okay, I have a motion from Nick to add $40,000 to the budget for the space needs. Do I have a second? Seconded by Jerry. Any discussion? Nick?
I heard Jeff's comments. I think that, frankly, I think across the country, the census numbers are a little skewed. I think April 1st, 2020 was Census Day, and I think a lot of our buying, not our buying, a lot of the buying that was done and homes that were sold and bought happened after that date. That was the beginning of COVID. So I think that, as I said before, it's important that we get a handle on where students are going to go, especially as they progress through the school system. And I would like to see that added to the budget.
Dennis?
I just have to add to that point, I mean, we still have 5 buildings, right? So unless we're gonna build another building from an assessment, moving the pieces around, you've done that already. You've moved classes, you've moved STEM, you continue to do that to make sure that the class size is appropriate, maintained the way you want them, and you move from building to building. So I don't know what a 40 grand's gonna buy us, actually. You think it's gonna come up with, we want another building? I mean, what are we expecting out of a study, other than spending $40,000?
I think if you look at, may I respond?
No, go ahead.
I think if you look at the last study that we did, we had 14 or 15 different scenarios of different grade changes. There's been discussion in the community recently about, oh, what if we changed to a way, I forget the way Brookfield does things, which is make one building K2, make one building 3-5, 3-4, whatever it is. Instead of having community schools do it that way, I think that's something that could be interesting. In the last study, there was discussion about moving central office into a different building and utilizing that space differently. Those aren't things that we, the board, or even we don't have experts on staff to talk about those things.
Well, we don't? I mean, how's it done now?
The study that was done.
Hold on, Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, the study that was done, we still have all those reports, right? I mean, that's when I first came on the board,
The ad hoc study.
the ad hoc study.
And so how long ago was that?
Oh,
I think
so
it was
this is like my 9th year.
Okay,
2014,
so it's
2015.
9 years old, okay.
Right, but I think maybe it's worth looking at that before you invest in a study, just to see what
Right,
they
you go
actually
review it.
proposed, because if I remember correctly, there was a ton of scenarios, and a lot were ruled out by different things.
Yes.
That was feasibility that you could not do, so, like, I get, I think I even brought up, like, can you do a K first, but the amount of money to make a school, because if I'm K first, second, can't go upstairs or something like that.
Supposed to be on the
I forgot, there's all these different rules around it, but I would say, rather than spend the money on a study, take the data we have, yeah, it may be dated, but I'm sure it's still good data to look at, and see if there's any scenario that they presented is even worth looking into before we invest $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for them just to do the same thing. Our
can-
buildings are the same buildings from 9 years ago.
The study, I agree.
Yeah.
It has a whole bunch of
Yeah.
has a whole bunch of data. There's a lot of good
There's a
information
lot.
there. It's not, we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. The purpose of that study, as I remember, was to contract.
Correct.
And it's kind of the opposite
Right.
of what we're expecting.
Of what we're talking
We're
about.
experiencing
It
now.
it was to shrink the schools.
It was to shrink the schools, but it
Yeah.
still had a lot of good data of what
Yeah.
the schools were capable of
How many
doing.
classroom buildings?
Because you had to reconfigure bathrooms. If you were going to do a school for just K for a second, it was a lot of just like, it would have had to been like a Monroe L because it's all one level. You couldn't do Stepney. You had to reconfigure all the bathrooms to make them small. Like, it was just a lot of different scenarios that you had to look at. But I think it's worth maybe breaking out the data and
Sure.
seeing if there's anything valuable in there to look at as we move forward. But we may not even have a space issue, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
don't know what kindergarten enrollment is. It may
Yeah.
be lower, significantly lower than this past year.
And I'm not familiar with that study, but was there a transportation component with that? Did you analyze buses going to certain schools?
I think that
I
was part of the
believe-
scenarios
yeah.
we
Yeah,
looked
that
at.
was part of
'Cause
it.
Yeah.
What we did was we created a number of different scenarios, or the ad hoc committee created a number of different scenarios, a bunch of different configurations of buildings. And then, as a group, we all sat together and came up with, what are the pros, what are the cons of each thing. And sometimes, transportation was brought
And
in.
then we have a
Yeah.
transportation contract this year, right? So it could be a scenario we give them to think about, but not necessarily act on if we're doing that.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Jeff,
concerned
go
for your
ahead.
study point, right?
What I would say is the next one, I think, I would not be opposed to doing an in-house study. I think we have the experts here with using the data. As Christine said, the buildings haven't changed, our population has changed, but we have those numbers. And that potentially we could do something in-house with a subcommittee.
Right.
Where board members, administrative staff are involved in looking at the old, sorting through that old data, using our current numbers and our projections, moving forward. I certainly wouldn't be opposed to that. My trouble is the amount of money that we spent
Got yourself.
on these studies that have really been looked back at them and said they've been irrelevant or bad use of our time and money.
Yep.
So to your point, I am a consultant by trade and by livelihood. And what I do is I take your watch and tell you what time it is, right? But we have our watches, right? We have the people who know what's going on here. I think you ought to use the expertise we have and analyze it. We know which kids are coming in, which grades. You can model that up and you can assess what works or doesn't. I mean, we have the tools, we just have to put the will behind it.
Just don't let your clients know that, you won't have any work.
We'll edit that out.
What's driving the space need assessment, Nick, in your mind? Is it just the enrollment component?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the enrollment study, which was with the 2019 enrollment study, I point to Alan because, anyway.
Don't even get me going.
I think the 2015 study looked at, as Joe said, a contracting population. And I think if you look at the availability of classrooms that we have in our different schools, we are bumping up to our upper limit. On the other side of the equation, if you look at the teachers that we've brought in, I finally kind of breathed a half sigh of relief looking at our average class sizes in K-5 because we weren't having those numbers in years past. But if you bring in another section, you need a place to put them. And so I think this is going to be more of an issue than we might realize at the current moment in the budget year.
Yeah, I'm looking at the enrollment. In 12 and 13, we're at 3488. 21-22, we're at 3366. So we're still 122 short of where we were in 12 and 13. And if you go from 15 all the way out, we average basically the same number
The problem
for
there,
6 straight years in a
Justin,
row.
the problem there might be that, the first number you were saying. I
3488.
think we had half-day K, so you can
Yep.
kind of cut the kindergartens in half.
Okay, when did that stop?
2013.
When we went full-time kindergarten?
Christopher was the first year, so
Not too long ago.
2013?
Yeah.
Might have been the next year.
'Cause
Okay, so
he-
it went to
2000
3379, which actually equals kind of where
About where
we're
we are
at
now.
today. But if you look at the previous 6 years, we're averaging 3180 the whole way through. So there's an uptick of a couple hundred. The question is that is that a one-time trend? Is that the anomaly in the pattern, or is that something that we're going to see growth on? My guess is, are we going to see migration to the town more so than we just saw right there in that spike? And I think that the assumption would say we're probably going to, my assumption, right, without knowing too much, would just be, are we really going to see more migration to the town that's going to equal or put us up to a bigger number than we saw in 13-14, which was 8 or 9 years ago? Right, so I guess what I'm saying is the space should be sufficient. If it was sufficient in 13-14, it should be sufficient in 21, 22, 22, and 23 would be my position on that. Right.
Have you gotten any kindergarten numbers?
Nope, we have the, we have
just got the letter
form
today.
open, right? You got the,
Letters
do
went
you have
out.
any
Just got
kindergartners?
it today.
Yeah, us too.
We have, we
you-
sent the letters out.
Oh, I
because,
guess I should check my mail.
Your neighborhood, I don't think.
Oh, we didn't get-
We got it. I
Oh,
got it.
because
you
we
got
already
one.
are Monroe,
'Cause you're
well,
already-
that's right.
I got one.
Yeah.
So that's in the Google
Okay, so
Forms
that
open
started
for people to
today.
pop up.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it started before break. We did the press release.
Yeah.
And we did the letter last week.
Okay.
And then we did the, opened it up. So
Okay.
we're doing the Google form now.
So, I mean, that's, yeah.
It's gonna be telling, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
If
Sure.
we can,
And-
go ahead.
I'm sorry, and the only thing, I think that the big pressure that we've had so far is where people have come in, like people have moved into town at the elementary. It's you saw my numbers, like our high school numbers, our middle school numbers really didn't change much from one year to the next. It's all concentrated right now at the elementary, so hopefully we get some easing of pressure there.
Right, and it was certain, like, it was Fawn Hollow School District
Fawn
that took the
Hollow.
bulk of it,
Yep,
which is why we went through, Alan and I and
Yep.
Joe and Jack, went through a map and literally just looked at where we could shift streets over from Stepney and Fawn Hollow into Monroe L, which had a little bit more room for space and things like that.
yeah.
I think if we watch our numbers, then there will be a time where
Right.
we're gonna need to do a study. I just don't think that it's
Yeah.
now.
And like I said, I think we have data. It's not worth, I mean, it's worth, we could always look to see what we have, if it's even worth giving us any
Okay,
insight.
Jeff and then Dennis, and then
I would just say,
I wanna move
we're
it.
done with discussion, I just
Yeah.
like to call a question. Nick has a motion on it.
Yep. So,
If that's ever all right with everybody.
yep.
Agree. Any other discussion? No, we have a move. So we have a motion by Nick. All those in favor? All those against? Shannon, are you a yay or a nay?
I'm a nay.
Okay, motion does not pass. Nick,
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to add $85,000 to the budget to add one FTE to the finance department.
have a motion by Nick to add $85,000 for one full-timer to the finance department. Do I have a second? Seconded by Jerry. Discussion. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you. This has kind of been something that I've been talking about since we did the merger of the two finance departments. Again, if you line up the head counts of the Board of Education Finance Department and the Town Finance Department from when the Board of Education had a full-time director, we are still down a person. As I said when we did the merger, the amount of work at best has stayed the same, but I think just looking at all the different grant funding, all the different things that have come into the Board of Ed and the town, that the amount of work has gone up. And I don't mean to call out Ron, but I see a lot of cars in parking lots on weekends. And the ultimate goal was, and I had proposed in the merger, that a position like this actually straddle both the town and the Board of Ed. I don't get a vote on the town budget. I'm sitting here on the Board of Ed, so that's why I can only affect this one. And I think it's needed to ease some of the burden on the finance departments of both sides of the town.
Okay, any further discussion? I don't doubt that the position would be welcomed and needed, but again, I just don't think that now is the time. You know, when we're looking at a large increase and having to use grant money to possibly reduce that. That's my input. Dennis?
Sorry, I wasn't going to say anything because I wasn't here for the prior when we had to. But I, for one, at least from what I've seen from the budget process and what Ron, I think there's a lot to be added, as we had Mike on, with having people understand both sides and be intimately involved in both sides of what the town's paying and what the board's paying, and I think you've done a phenomenal job, Ron. And I think if you needed help, you'd be screaming for it, in my opinion. Sorry.
Any further discussion on the motion by Nick? Hearing none. All those in favor? And you have that, 3. All those against?
Nay.
Motion does not pass. Nick?
Last one, thank you. I'd like to make a motion to add $150,000 to the budget for a 10-month administrator at Fawn Hollow.
I have a motion from Nick to add $150,000 to the budget for one full-timer, a 10-month position at Fawn Hollow. Do I have a second on that? Alan seconds that. Discussion? Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you. I think that, I forget who said this before, but, you know, the superintendent proposes his budget. I completely understand that. But I think that the board learns things in the discussion from different department heads. And something that really struck me was when Lee talked about the different amount of people, the different administrators in the district who are evaluating teachers. Our superintendent, our assistant superintendent, both have, caseloads is a bad word, but it's the only one I can think of to get my point across. Caseloads of teachers that they're evaluating, not because they're the assistant super and the super, but they're acting in the capacity of an administrator at Fawn Hollow. I think the board learns things during the budget process, and we talked about an increase in enrollment. We talked about an increase in teachers at Fawn Hollow, especially, as well as other schools. And so I think the administrators need to parallel the increase in staff and the increase in students and teachers. And Fawn Hollow is our biggest school by far, elementary school that is. And I think an additional administrator at Fawn Hollow is needed, especially with the numbers that we know we have today.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Alan?
How many teachers do we have at Fawn Hollow?
Lee, how many,
A little over 50.
And how many times do those teachers have to be evaluated?
It depends, but I mean, like traditionally, like pre-COVID, I was just going 3 times for informal,
So 3 times for each teacher?
generally.
And that's being handled by Joe, you're helping out with that?
yeah, Jack, do you have anyone at Fawn Hollow, Jack?
Currently, I have one.
You have one. I have 5 right now. I believe Julia has a couple.
I have 5 at Fawn Hollow.
Yep.
Leave it at that, Alan. That was
Yeah,
a good
leave it at
point.
that.
That was a good point.
Yeah. Any further discussion? Again, I think it would be welcomed. I see the need. I just don't know if right now is the time to be adding $150,000 to our budget. And I don't think that we should ask the superintendent to be deciding to cut something else to add this in to make it budget neutral. Dennis?
I did listen to all the presentations, and she specifically said she didn't need a person when asked, although it's during a budget presentation, so it's a little awkward, but, you know, I applaud the thought of making sure that everybody's not overworked. But I think the camaraderie that I've seen and exhibited in the budget presentations and the conversations that we had were outstanding. And, you know, I think, from what I gather from the budget that was presented and the way people have been presenting themselves here, if they need help, they're going to scream for help. And I think our goal is to meet that.
So you don't think she needs help?
She said herself she didn't need it.
What's Joe and Sheila and all them doing if she doesn't need help?
But they're getting it done, right? She's getting help. And the camaraderie seemed to work for them. They're working more as a team. And there's more, you know, there's other aspects than evaluating staff that happen, I'm sure. So, you know, that interaction seems to be working. I may be paraphrasing her words from when she sat up there and said it, but, you know, that's why I don't think it's necessary at this point. I think it's good to be watching over everybody's shoulder and making sure that we have the right resource in the right place, but I think people know when they're hitting the wall and should be able to say help.
Hold on, gentlemen. Shannon, do you have a comment on this motion?
Yes, yes, we were in discussion time frame. So I was just saying, like, with fiscal responsibility in mind, I'm not here to, pretend that, like, that I know the district needs better than the superintendent as far as this goes, and I'm not here to add expense to the budget. So, I'm going to be voting no. I just wanted to say I will not be in favor of this motion. For that reason, I have fiscal responsibility in mind, and I'm not here to increase the superintendent's proposed budget with specific items that I deem, that's not part of what the superintendent has asked for.
Okay, Nick?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I understand the point, but it is a bit awkward in these public meetings that we have, especially when we're doing budget presentations. It's like you're asking somebody, can you do your job? And you're expecting them to say no, right? So I understand that. I think it would also be problematic if a principal said to the superintendent or to the board, listen, I have all these different things I want, consumables for art, an extra para, whatever the list is. Oh, and by the way, I need another administrator, another $150,000 administrator. I understand that. That's what I heard in the budget presentation. That's why I made the motion. And I think that there was a comment made before, again, I didn't write down who said it, but the reason why the Monroe Public School System is as good as it is and why we've been so successful over the decades, the last 10 years especially, that was the comment that was made, is because our staff and our faculty are going above and beyond their call of duty. And we hear it all the time. We hear it at board meetings about what different people are doing, right? I just made the comment about
No argument that we have a stellar staff. We definitely have a staff that goes above and beyond. No argument there.
Go ahead.
About
increasing the superintendent's proposed.
Shannon, hold on 1 second. Go ahead.
I just, made that comment about, parking lots of cars on the weekends, and that's not even what we see people do at home, right? So I just want to make that clear. And with regards to fiscal responsibility, again, the people will tell us this infatuation with one and done. Again, it's admirable, but I believe that our goal is to put out what we believe is necessary, and so that's the only reason why I believe at this point it's necessary. So that's why I did it.
Okay. Alan?
Joe, why don't you tell us the role, in general, the roles and responsibilities of a principal?
The roles and responsibilities of the principal, their primary role is to evaluate staff. I think general supervision on a daily basis, as well as teacher evaluation. Like Lee and Sheila said, we have a responsibility to get into the classrooms to evaluate all of the staff, whether it's a new teacher, 3 times a year, or if it's a more tenured teacher, twice a year. I'm clearly minimizing the role to some extent, because there's also the whole interface with the community, with the PTO as well.
Curricular leader.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. Yep. Yeah.
Professional development.
Yeah.
Staff within their buildings promote professional development. If they need more cooperative.
Carry out the vision of the district that's been set forth by this board and then by the admin council.
Yeah.
So there's 500 students, assuming principal would deal with discipline, who, in terms of special ed, you have about 16%, give or take, at Fawn Hollow. Who runs those meetings? It's usually an administrator. Is it the principal? Is someone doing that?
Lee, do you do most of those meetings, or will you have the school psychologist as well?
I'm present at those meetings.
Yep.
The SRBI meetings, absolutely. And
Yep.
there's 650 students.
650.
676.
Okay, so evaluating teachers, PPT meetings, SRBI meetings, curriculum,
Bus referrals.
bus referrals, discipline, parent questions. I mean, it's absurd to think one person could do that.
Jerry, go ahead.
You know, if you want to be fiscally responsible, then why do you pull out your superintendent to evaluate 5 teachers, your head of special ed to evaluate 5 teachers? I don't get it, Dennis. They're making money to run the system, to run special ed, which, by the way, is a mountainous job to be a superintendent. But we're fiscally responsible because we're doing the camaraderie of pulling them out of central office to go to Fawn Hollow and evaluate. I don't get it either. And everybody's allowed their own opinion. I just don't get it.
Justin?
Yeah, I you know, I think the expectation is that everybody goes above and beyond, right? The idea that everybody's doing a little bit more. I mean, I can tell you in the corporate environment right now, do more with less is the mantra. Right? Everybody's pulling their weight, and if you don't do it, you don't have a job to go do, right? So I think the do more with less, is it getting done is the question, right? Is it being done? Is the job being done? If it is, then adding $150,000 to a budget that the superintendent gave us just doesn't make sense to me.
Jeff, go ahead.
I would just add that I'm not going to argue with the points that you guys made as far as the need. What I would say is, if the need was great enough, Joe would have put it in his budget and presented it to us. I'm not going to say that we don't need it. I would just say Joe is our representative to what we need, and he presents it to us for us to discuss. And, you know, I think if the need was great enough, Joe would have put it in the budget. I'm not going to speak for you, Joe, but if it was, if it was great enough, it would have been in this budget.
It's a good point. It's definitely something we've talked about and something, you know, talked about for the future, for sure.
I'm sure there are a lot of tough decisions when he gets all the the department budgets. He agonizes. I know for a fact he agonizes over what to put in and not to put in. And we all know the great lengths that all of our staff and all of our administrators go through, and we appreciate that for sure. Dennis, did you have something?
I do appreciate the comments and the knowledge, since I'm new to this. But yeah, I've been in corporate world forever, and I've taken multiple corporations to flatter existence. And there's a lot, even though intrinsic, there's a lot of benefit of having the top know exactly what the bottom is doing and being involved in that. You have a lot of interaction that kind of makes things happen that you wouldn't necessarily hear if we had Joe just sitting up here, right, or his office. You clearly get a lot of benefits from knowing your staff, and I think that's what truly makes our school system unique and tremendous. It really is a lot of back and forth, and I agree nobody should be overworked, but I agree with Justin. We basically, everybody's working harder, and especially under COVID conditions, it's been brutal. So we want to make sure that we keep people from being overstressed. But I agree too that if there was a need, I'm pretty sure that Joe would have put it in the budget, and I think he's close enough to the action to know that. So I applaud the thought process, but at this point I'd have to be a no. So,
Shannon, did you want to add anything?
I very, very much appreciate our staff, our administrators, and our teachers, and I know they go above and beyond, not just before COVID and since, and they're greatly appreciated. It's just, looking at the whole picture and what our roles and responsibilities are, we have to do the best we can with the dollars that we can, and I'll be voting no. I'm not adding to the superintendent's budget with fiscal responsibility in mind and what the taxpayers can afford, and I will be voting no.
Alan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Joe, you meet with the superintendents of Fairfield County. Are you aware of any superintendent that has a school of, would you say 650?
Yep.
650 students with one administrator?
I don't, Alan. I haven't asked either, but I don't know.
Nick?
Yeah, just very last point, in our staff summaries and our budget books, just a quick note on numbers for FY23 projected. Fawn Hollow is only 8% smaller than Jockey Hollow, and Jockey Hollow has a full-time assistant principal.
Good discussion. Any further discussion? No. Hearing no further discussion. All those in favor of this motion? 1, 2, 3. All those against?
Nay.
Motion does not pass. Do I hear any other motions?
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to accept the proposed the proposed budget with the modifications using 50% of grant money. Now, do I have to put a dollar amount or no?
We can specify that in there. So Christine is making a motion to accept the superintendent's proposed budget using 50% of grant money. And the budget would be $64,836,802.64. Do I have a second?
Second.
Dennis.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Dennis. Thank you, Shannon. Discussion? Jeff?
I would just ask is if the what we added with the 0.2 for the psychologist, is that part of that proposal?
That's what I'm trying to understand that too, because I think what we're at, I think if I hear you correctly, you're asking for 86, whatever, 836, 802 minus
The 50.
390.
Correct.
If you're looking at 50%, right?
The 50%.
No, I'm sorry, you're
Yeah.
right. I need to adjust that
You
number.
need to adjust it down
So-
by whatever the 50% is.
64,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ron.
64,
Yep.
440, 665.64.
A lot of sixes.
Okay, so let me correct that.
Yep.
So we have a motion by Christine to accept the superintendent's budget using 50% of the grant money, which makes the final budget number 64,440,665.64. Correct, Ron?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And those three positions that we previously discussed and approved, those are budget neutral. So,
Right.
so that would include that, Joe.
Yep.
That your final number would be the 64,440,665.64.
Would include those three positions.
Correct.
Correct.
Because we made it.
To make those budget neutral.
neutral.
Okay.
Okay, at your discretion.
Mhm.
As far as line items.
And leaving the other 390, not using the 395 for
Correct.
the remaining 50% for
Right.
that, correct?
Correct, we would,
Right.
if I understand the board correct, we would leave the other 50% for programs,
Future, right.
reductions next year,
Future use.
right? We can use that the following year
Mhm.
to help with any increase. Okay, further discussion. Nick?
Yeah, I think, first of all, this is the final, this is it, right? Final motion. I think that we had a lot of good discussions this budget season. I think we had a lot of good presentations. I think we had a lot of good data that was given to us. I just want to say thank you to all of my fellow board members for good discussions, good conversations. I'll be voting against the budget. I don't agree with the percentage of the grant money. I also, my amendments were defeated. I think those are things that should be included in the budget. Like I said before, I think our role is to present the budget that we feel funds the school system. I think these are things that should have been included. That's not to take away from a lot of the good things that are in the budget. We were able to keep, well, for now, we were able to keep the interns in the budget this year, which is something we fought very hard for last year. The summer reading program is still there. We were able to do some things in athletics with ice time. I know that was a big thing. But I think after the discussions that we had tonight, and especially with the grant funding, I can't support the budget as it is. Thank you.
I'll speak when I can.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Let me think. I am going to vote in favor of Christine's motion. I think it's the best that we can do. I think it's a fair compromise and the best that we can do with balancing, balancing what we have and what we can afford. So I'm going to be voting in favor of this. I think it is the best decision that we can do. We have to be responsible and just make the best. It's not an easy choice. I wish that we didn't have to use. I wish that it wasn't this percent either. But I think it is the best decision that we can make. So I'll be voting in favor.
Thank you. Jeff, you seconded that motion, correct?
I did.
Make sure I got a second on that. Okay. Any further discussion? I would like to see us using more of the grant money. I understand the concerns, but I think that this is the consensus and that this is the way to get it done and to support the superintendent and the staff with his budget and move forward. Any further discussion?
Sorry, I wasn't very articulate. That's kind of what I was trying to get to, David. It's a compromise, you know. I agree with you, and I think it's all the way around. But I think this is the fairest compromise that we can come up with.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of this motion?
Aye.
Got that, Diane? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sorry, all those against? 2. Motion passes. Joe, you have a budget.
All right.
Congratulations.
Okay, moving along. Item number B, under new business, review and approval of the 22-23 school calendar. Joe?
Diane, did you get the vote? Did you get everybody?
You got it?
You have everybody? Okay. I'm going to just ask Jack, first of all, thank you to Jerry and Dennis, who both sat on the calendar committee. Jack put the committee together along with representatives from each of the bargaining units as well as parent representatives as well. So every year we're given a calendar from CES. All the schools, all the districts in the state are given the regional calendar from the Regional Education Service Center. Ours is CES. They give us their calendar, and we try to kind of work within some of the time frames that they have. So a lot of the schools will be on similar vacations and whatnot. So if you have, if you teach in one town and your kids go to school in another nearby town, you have roughly the same school calendar. But Jack, do you want to just walk us through a little bit some of the rationale that was used through this?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. So we, the calendar that we're put in front of you this evening actually is very much a mirror of this year's calendar. Some questions were raised about the start date of school, talking about how early and or how late it may be. But as we walked through the calendar and looked at what would occur in terms of a closing date in June, should we make our opening later, you quickly move in to significantly into the month of June. Factor in any number of snow days, and June can become an issue. When we talk about the comfort level at schools in terms of heat, because of the fact that our buildings are not overall air conditioned. August and September tend to be the months where we're cooling down as opposed to heating up. And then when we get to mid to end of May, the heat begins to rise, and to go further into June can become a struggle, especially as we get into mid, and if we potentially got into mid to late June. So that was a significant factor and point of discussion. The remainder of the calendar is really quite self-explanatory. It's the typical holidays. We have our PD days in it, 3 days professional development at the onset of the year, 2 during the school year, and then the typical holidays. We did have a discussion over the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, whether to keep it as a school day, which is currently an early dismissal day, or whether to have a full day off. We had historically it was quite some time ago now, but we had the Wednesday off, so that was a conversation. But again, to be prudent with the calendar and the opening and closing of school, the decision was made to keep the Wednesday before Thanksgiving as an early release day, so it's included as one of our 182 instructional days for the year. I can answer any other specific questions if anyone has.
Any questions for Jack or Joe on the calendar? Do I have a motion to accept the calendar as presented? Jerry, do I have a second? Nick? Thank you very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the calendar? All those are in favor? Thank you very much.
I just wanted to add, because I didn't know this, you can subscribe to the school calendar on your phone, because I thought maybe we could put it on our Facebook page, because I thought it was a pretty, especially like, oh, there's a day off from school, this and that. You could subscribe to it on the RSS feed and we'll feed into your calendar automatically. So you can see all the days off, things like that. And I talked to a lot of parents, my friends, and they were like, they had no idea that was even an option. So I thought that might be helpful. Yeah, and then you can delete off, like it puts everything on there for the, and it's by school, but then you can delete off stuff you don't need, so it's super easy. And then you have like the end of the school, or, you know, April vacation, things that I see come up on Facebook sometimes, things like that.
Yep.
And you can put on your phone.
Thank you. No, that's good. That's good.
I was very happy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Apparently. Mr. Stevens,
Motion to adjourn.
do I have a second? Any, sorry, Dennis seconds it. Any objections?
We voted on the
Hearing,
We voted on the calendar, right?
what?
We voted on the
We voted on the
Yeah, we did.
calendar?
Yes.
Hearing none. Good night, everybody.